Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as definitely ours, but hey, it's something. Now, if you notice in this episode, my voice is a little bit different. You see, I'm slowly getting better over the whatever the heck I had or have, because I still feel a little under the weather. It's sort of like this weird thing where you sometimes feel really good, sometimes you feel pretty bad, and I'm technically feeling worse than I did yesterday, but I'm still feeling relatively better than I did at the beginning when I was every joint in my body is in pain. And despite the fact that I'm in constant pain, I have to get up to spit out my mucus and get my food and blah blah blah. But yeah, sickness doesn't deter the videos. The videos are going up as they are. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to be talking about Kazakhstan. For those who, I don't know how you would not know what's happening in Kazakhstan at this point, but in Kazakhstan, there was a fuel price rise, and a bunch of protesters started protesting against the fuel prices rising. And here's the thing that, this protest movement has been very big, to the point where the Prime Minister of Kazakhstan had to resign, and a bunch of other ex-Soviet states are offering the aid to Kazakhstan. Particularly Russia is going to try and help Kazakhstan try to get things under control. And many people are seeing this as a power grab. Russia is going to try and use this to try and exert political pressure over Kazakhstan, similar to what they were doing in Ukraine. Now, here's the thing. Since I'm consistent, I support the protesters. That's the problem with being consistent. I see, as a person who believes that rising gas prices under neoliberal economies is a bad thing, I feel that protesters are on the right, and the authoritarian regimes that want to crush the skulls of the protesters, they're in the wrong. But of course, there are a lot of other people who seem to have a different perspective, but with similar consistencies. Most particularly Ben Norton and the Gray Zone have been trying to spread this narrative that the protests are actually U.S. ops. And it's I'm sick and tired of this. This is so stupid. And especially considering, I pointed this out, but this shows how quote-unquote inconsistent they're technically being. The incumbent leader's party and the previous leader's party is Nur Otan, which means Radiant Fatherland. Their ideology is Kazakhstan nationalism, pragmatic Eurasianism, authoritarianism, social conservatism, economic liberalism, and secularism. They are literally the neoliberal economic parties that these guys supposedly are we hate. Supposedly the Gray Zone's supposed to hate neoliberals, but of course, and the neoliberals are the ones that are aligned with Russia, all of a sudden, oh no, we gotta protect them. Ideologically, the Gray Zone support is all over the place. They'll support someone who's supposedly far left in Nicaragua, and then go to Kazakhstan and they'll support someone who's right wing, and go to Russia, they support the right wing as well, and then go to China, they're supposed to support the communists, and then go to another country like Iran and they support them, even though all these countries are not politically aligned to 100%, but they go to these guys because because everybody's pointed out, Gray Zone's only narrative is U.S. bad. That is their entire ideology, U.S. bad, and that is of course just going to lead to them just supporting anybody who's opposed to the U.S. Meanwhile, I am consistent with my principles, so that means that when countries rise up against their governments and support left-wing things like lowering gas prices, I'm down for that. Especially considering these are protests that literally sparked left-wing movements into every single Latin American country in recent years, which the Gray Zone supported with them, but didn't support with Kazakhstan because their geopolitical interests just didn't align. I keep getting sick and tired of people taking the Gray Zone seriously, so let's move on. The next one is coming from the UK. A new political party is going to be standing for the seat that was left by Sir David Amess. For those who don't remember what this is referring to, I'll give you a brief summary. David Amess was a member of parliament in the South End West constituency, but then on October 15th, 2021, Amess was murdered by a Muslim, like a far-right Muslim guy. And his murder is going to trigger a by-election that is going to happen in February 3rd of this year. And as has come tradition for, like, most UK, like, constituencies in the recent years, when an MP is killed, the other major parties will choose to stand down to basically let the incumbent party's MP cruise into the election. This has been a tradition ever since Joe Cox was murdered in 2016, and the UK's four other big parties, Labour, Liberal Democrats, Greens, and Reform UK, have stated that they're not going to field a candidate. However, that isn't the case for a lot of really smaller parties. UKIP has announced that they're going to run an immigration spokesman by the name of Steve Laws. The British Freedom Party, which is a party that is further to the right than UKIP, like a borderline fascist party, is going to be running their leader, Jada Franson. And, as the story says, a new party has entered the scene to run a candidate by the name of Graham Moore. The party in question is called the English Constitution Party, and just a quick glance at their website will tell you their platform. Primary aim, English self-determination, stop tyranny, stop totalitarianism, stop mandates, stop forced and coerced vaccines, stop putting children at risk of death and injury to protect adults. Adults protect children, free choice. Take back control of the English Constitution and common law, a light-touch British Parliament, English independently governed counties, not regions, fair, honest elections with representatives that support your English constitutional rights. So yeah, this is basically just another far-right party that intends to run because they think the conservatives have gone too soft or something. Even though it's, like, very untrue, but whatever. So anyways, let's move on to a very sad story. George Floyd's niece was shot in the early hours of New Year's Day following what appeared to be a targeted shooting at their house, like, during the New Year's celebration. Like, you know how in the New Year's celebration people, like, shoot guns, like, around, be like, yay, hooray, the New Year. Supposedly, that's what happened here. But, of course, George Floyd's family's not stupid. So they're like, yeah, why would they specifically go here? Like, go to this house to do this? There's not much else I can really say, except that I hope that she makes a full recovery, and that this doesn't end up being a sadder story than it is now. Next story is the Congressional Progressive Caucus backs measure to expand the Supreme Court. The Congressional Progressive Caucus on Wednesday endorsed a bill expanding the Supreme Court and reinvigorating the push for a larger bench and after the effort fizzled out last summer. Representative Pramila Jayapal, the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, said the Democrat coalition believes that urgent work to restore American democracy must involve expanding the Supreme Court. The bill, dubbed the Judiciary Act of 2021, would expand the Supreme Court from 9 seats to 13. Proponents believe that the legislation would restore balance in the court, which currently has a 6-3 conservative majority. Jayapal said the sitting bench was filled by a partisan right-wing effort to entrench a radical anti-democratic faction and erode human rights that have been won over decades. Now, here's the thing. I understand, like, at least they're not wording it in a way that makes me, like, hate it. Because, like, if you know that I've made a video on this topic, because I just made a video on this topic, not just made it, but I have a video on this topic, kind of, where I talk about the idea of, like, depoliticizing the Supreme Court and how that's BS. And at the very least, these guys are not being like, oh, we're going to depoliticize the Supreme Court. They fully accept that them doing this is literally just to balance the court in their favor. Because I really hated the wording of, like, we need to depoliticize the Supreme Court, when it's like, this has always been politicized. It's a branch of government. Of course it's politicized. But I guess I should address this thing. Do I agree with this? I don't know. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure if I agree with the idea of, like, expanding the court. I've talked about it a little bit before, but I have never really actively talked about it that much, because it's a subject that I'm not entirely sure would actually get that far. As I said, the idea fizzled out last summer, but now it's being re-entered in the limelight, so maybe it's time I talk about it again. I guess it will make sense for me to make that Supreme Court video now. But basically, my viewpoint on like anything regarding politics is basically, are you okay with your opponent doing the same thing you are doing? If conservatives introduced a bill tomorrow that said, well, not tomorrow, like if they win the midterms and then when the midterms happen, they go like, we will introduce a new bill that will expand the Supreme Court so that it is 25 for us conservatives. Would they be okay with that? Obviously not. And them doing this would kind of basically open the door to the conservatives doing that. Like, I mean, as we've shown, conservatives are okay with trying to pack the court in the legal ways that they can. So if they find out that they can do it in this way as well, they'll 100% do it. The one Supreme Court reform that I always say that needs to be done is term limits. I don't know if term limits is in the Judiciary Act of 2021. It probably is, which is fair. But I do believe that term limits is the thing that we need, rather than, like, if we're going to push for one thing, it has to be term limits rather than, like, pushing for expanding the court. I'm not disparaging the people who do advocate for expanding the Supreme Court, but I believe that it comes off as more short-sighted. Like, you were like, I got the solution to the problem, but then when you have to think about it, you have to think about it 10 steps ahead. And when you think about it 10 steps ahead, you realize, oh, this is not going to work out that well for us. I could be completely wrong, but that's just how I see it. So anyways, the last story is coming from the U.S. House. Brenda Lawrence has become the 25th House Democrat to not seek re-election. And that opens up Michigan District 14, and it's time for us to find the person to do it. Abdul El Sayed, you live there? We'll have to wait and see how things pan out there. I do like the idea of having some open blue seats, because we can win those, especially if we find somebody who can do the perfect inroads. So anyways, now let's move on to the main topic of this video. This episode is going to be the most like the early Thoughts On episodes as ever. For those who don't remember how Thoughts On worked, it wasn't supposed to be the idea of like I'm doing this intensive breakdown of this person. It's literally just me giving my thoughts on a content creator, be it good or bad. But then as the schedule changed in this channel, basically I tried to make it so that the Thoughts On episodes were a lot more oomph. Like they gave more, like had more bang for their buck. So I went into like biographies and like controversies. I would give more detailed back breakdowns and blah blah blah. But this one is basically sort of like a return to format for the older ones, because for many reasons. One, they don't really have any like biographies I can go to. Like, you do have like biographies of like dumb, boring, like fake news sites that definitely don't know what they're talking about, because they'll be like, we don't know who their husband is, when it's like their husbands can easily be found. And two, I don't really have any like negative thoughts on them. Like, the big breakdown ones are usually reserved for people that I'm negative about, but this is supposed to be a positive episode because the January is supposed to be the positive month. So with all the deliberation, the person in this episode is Mike Figueredo of the Humanist Report. Since I need some sort of biographical thing to explain who he is, here's his website. What is the Humanist Report? The Humanist Report is an anti-capitalist political podcast that discusses and analyzes current news events and pressing political issues. Each news story we cover is supplemented with thought-provoking, fact-based commentary that aims for the highest level of objectivity and occasionally humor. Our primary goal is to not appear neutral, but to remain objective. We do not aim to strike a false balance between the preposterous political positions, e.g. climate change is a hoax, homosexuality is a choice, racism doesn't exist, etc., but instead strive to maintain ideological consistency across a broad spectrum of political issues, while the content itself is meant to be engaging and informative. Our goal is to encourage activism amongst viewers through various means, such as influencing them to call their local representatives and/or vote, signing online petitions, engaging in grassroots activism, and donating to worthy causes and candidates. He started his show around 2015, which is like basically makes him like the first wave of like the Bernie inspired podcast scene. Like, because you see, like there were like many different waves of like the internet left wing podcast wave. Like There was TYT all the way back early on. Like, they were, like, way early on. Then, like, Kyle Kalinske was inspired by them, and there was, like, a bunch of levels with him. And Humanist Report was essentially, like, the first one to come out of the Bernie campaign, a thing that ended up becoming a common story amongst every left-wing podcaster. Notice how none of these podcasts began until after Bernie became prevalent. It's literally like Kyle and TYT that are the only ones who can claim, like, oh, we were around before Bernie. And it was because he was in that first wave of, like, progressive podcasters after Bernie that he basically steadily rose to the top. If you were a creator that already existed, like Kyle, TYT, and even ones that weren't necessarily quote-unquote political, like The Amazing Atheist, and Chris Reagan, like the ones that were kind of in the political sphere, those guys already existed, so they had, like, a head start. But then Humanist Report was sort of like the first wave of, like, people to ride on the Bernie wave, and they rose to the top. At one point, they did end up working for TYT, a similar story to Kyle, and much like that, that was when I started watching a lot of these kinds of people. I was already watching TYT in 2014, but then 2015 was when I was getting introduced to all these other guys, like, no, when I say these guys, I mean literally just two, Kyle and Mike. They were sort of different than TYT in a couple of ways. For one, they were younger than TYT. Cenk Uygur was to be frank, he's old AF. Meanwhile, Kyle and Mike were young. They were in their 20s at the time, but now they are, like, in their 30s. I think. I could be misremembering it wrong. It could be that stupid, like, internet biography of his that I read. But I think I even remember the specific first video of Mike's that I saw. I remember it vividly what my first video of Mike's was. It was the video where he talked about Bernie Sanders' civil rights activism. Because that was, like, one of the big things that many people pointed out for, like, Bernie against Hillary. Like, Hillary Clinton's like, oh, I'm the cool, big, I was a super supporter of all these things. But then you actually check her time period. She's like, oh, yeah, I was a Goldwater gal. It's like, you don't say that when you say that you want to be a civil rights activist. It's almost the equivalent of saying that you were supportive of George Wallace. I don't know if I subbed to him after that. I'm pretty sure I didn't. Maybe I did, and then I unsubbed for him for a little bit, and then I subbed him again. Because I think I did that with Kyle, too. I did that with a lot of people, actually, in sort of the political sphere of things. But, I was of the belief of, like, oh, yeah, 2016's over. We lost. Oh, well. But then 2017, of course, I re-entered all that scene real fast. And then 2018, I made the dumb decision, maybe I'll do it myself. A decision I regret to this very day. But back to Humanist Report. Like, a lot of people, like, I subbed to him, I watched his stuff, there's not much else I could say for that part. I watched his stuff. A lot of people watch people's stuff. But it was as, like, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020... It was around this time that it was very obvious that there was starting to be some divides between the Humanist Report and Kyle. Now, when I say divides, I don't mean like, oh, they hate each other. No. You could just tell very clearly there was like there was differences. As that spiel on his biography stated, he explicitly stated like he is anti-capitalist. Meanwhile, Kyle is not anti-capitalist. But you could tell it also based on, like, rhetoric and stuff. Like, I remember there was one argument that they had. I don't know if they had this argument or if, like, this is just an argument that people saw them having. But basically the idea was, like, Kyle was stating that he would not be in favor of abolishing private insurance, and it's a good thing that the Medicare for All bill doesn't do that. But then Humanist Report was saying he would be 100% in favor of abolishing private insurance, and he's glad that the Medicare for All bill did do that. Now, what's the answer to the question? Well, technically, they're both right. The Medicare for All bill doesn't actually technically ban private insurance, but it does do something that is almost the equivalent of banning private insurance, where it says that all things that are covered under the Medicare for All bill cannot be covered by another insurance plan, but other insurance plans can be there. You can get supplemental private health insurance, but not for any of the things that are stated in this bill. And it just so happens that all the viable medical procedures and all the viable medical stuff that would be covered under every single health insurance plan. Well, not every single health insurance plan, but by most health insurance plans, was covered under the Medicare for All plan. And the only thing that wasn't covered was plastic surgery, which isn't covered by any health insurance plans at all, because it's not a real medical procedure. Well, it is a medical procedure, but it's like, it's in the realm of like, we're not entirely sure if this is that good, so we're just not going to cover it. Health insurance companies don't want to be responsible for a botched nose job. Another difference was Kyle and Mike's views on like the sort of class social issue type battles. You see, Kyle, it's just blunt to say, and just very accurate to say, Kyle is a class reductionist. He always platforms people that are always like, class, screw all this other stuff, and talks about how they need to reach across the aisle to the right-wing populists who would literally stone a trans person to death the second they see one because, they agree with us on this, and this, even though they don't agree with you on this, and this. Do you not, again, I would love to be on a show with Kyle Klinsky just to ask him one question. What is the definition of right-wing populism? Because, again, Kyle does not know the answer to that question. And a guy with a poli-sci degree should probably know the answer to that question. But Kyle is basically a class reductionist. And, he always makes the arguments of, we need to push for the white working class. But he doesn't say white. But then he keeps saying, no, when I said working class, of course I meant people of color as well. Of course I meant trans people as well. Of course I meant them as well when I said working class. It's like, okay, then why you keep framing, all the stuff regarding race and gender as culture war nonsense? Meanwhile, Mike, who is gay, cannot necessarily go, we need to stop this culture war notnonsense. He can't really do that. He can, but it would not be beneficial for him in the long run. And unlike the, spiel of, other creators where they're we want this thing, but they don't actually do anything to get that thing. We hear this all the time, big content creators would be big progressive content creators would be, I love the idea of multiple parties. I love the idea of, a ranked choice of voting system. I love all this stuff. But they don't actually do anything to, facilitate any of that. Sure, Kyle's saying, Joe Biden stinks, and we need to not vote for him, and instead try to help support a third-party person is irrelevant when, at the end of the day, he doesn't even vote on Election Day. Meanwhile, Humanist Report, at the very least, is, actually gave, minor party candidates, episodes of a show. I think he interviewed Jill Stein back in 2016. Then he interviewed, the Green Party candidate in Maine, Lisa Savage. And he started a new series on his show where he's, interviewing a bunch of smaller candidates in the effort of, hoping to get, an AOC win. Everybody's been hoping for that ever since AOC won. He's even go so far as to try and push for the March for Medicare for All. Granted, the March for Medicare for All was filled with, a bunch of anti-Semites and grifters, but him shouting out this march did show that he was at least somewhat interested in, the idea of, actual activism to try and bring the issue to attention. Another thing that's good about him is that he's not in this, stupid, shit on the squad every single day spiel. He critiques the squad, but he doesn't also, critique them when they do stuff correct. I'll never get over that. People literally shat on the squad for voting no on a bill they wanted them to vote no to. I don't think the Humanist Report did that. He critiques the squad and even does some critiques that I'm not necessarily sure I agree with, but it's he critiques them, obviously. I critique them sometimes, but he's also not stupid enough to basically be okay, bridge burned, no more AOC, no more all this other stuff. And he doesn't really seem to be the kind of guy that doesn't, burn bridges. He's really only burned one bridge that I think of at this particular moment, and that was, the bridge he burned with Jimmy Dore, because Jimmy Dore burned it for some reason. But Mike won't burn the bridge with someone unless they burn the bridge with him, which I think can lead to him, being too soft on people that I don't think he should be soft on. But everybody falls in that trap where they've been friends with someone for so long that they don't see the red flags that they probably should get rid of. Random example, say somebody sent a bunch of their fans to go attack a smaller creator whose biggest sin was literally just starting a GoFundMe to help them out because they had spent a long period of time complaining about how they can't pay for their bills, how it's very hard for them at this particular moment in time. And there's been like someone who's literally making money off of their shame and sorrow. That's a pretty sussy baka behavior to me. But of course, everybody's got rose-colored goggles for their own people. And another thing that I can actually give to Humanist Report is that he's actually done a thing that I wanted big creators like him to do. One problem that I have with a lot of larger creators is that they keep saying like they want to build this like sort of indie media left sphere, and yet they're not doing anything to do so aside from building up their own brands. And the only shows that they do shout out are the shows that don't need shouting out. Like how not long ago someone like was like, hey, we need to shout out Dylan Burns, and it's like, Dylan Burns doesn't need your help with sub count. Dylan Burns is fine with sub count. Or like Vosh is like, let's shout out Shoe on Head, or it's like, Shoe on Head has been a prevalent creator on the internet for a while. She doesn't need your assistance. But for 1 month, Humanist Report did a show called Dystopian Times, and during each of the episodes, he decided that he was going to shout out a smaller leftist creator that really needed help. Like, I mean, these were accounts that had like really small like sub numbers, like, and they had very small, modest goals, like get this person to like 5,000 subs, or get this person to 1,000 subs, blah blah blah. Like shouting out all these really small creators. Couldn't help but notice that somebody was missing from the lineup. Somebody that you've been following for a while? Somebody you said that you'd check out like months ago, like half a year ago at least? Somebody whose video essays would probably need a lot more of a boost algorithmically because content posted less frequently is not really the friend of the algorithm as opposed to someone who can stream every day? Who could that person be? But don't worry, Mike. At least we still have this.
Another person said, might as well call Ed Markey Lee Harvey Oswald, because he just killed a Kennedy. Damn.
You hear that, guys? Mike Figueredo said damn to one of my tweets, and he called me a person. I'm gonna cry. In all seriousness, I did kind of feel some like, oh, when that episode came out, I was like, oh, well, I wonder if my tweet made it in the episode. And sure enough, it did. Honestly, that was more good. That was actually better for me than being in the freaking Kennedy thing. Being in the Kennedy letter, it was like funny, but I didn't care. But being in the Humanist Report video was actually pretty cool. And if I am ever picked for one of those like shout out things, that's 100% what I'm going to say in the video. You know, if you're a viewer of this channel, you may already remember me from this classic tweet. Maybe I'll even play the Humanist Report clip when I'm in that episode. But anyways, there's really not much else for me to say, to be honest. This is one of those, like I said, this is one of those like return to form thoughts on. I gave my general thoughts on Humanist Report, and I like him. He's pretty good. Not much else I could say. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell so you don't find a future video when it comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.